What is motivating Republicans to create a problem out of nothing? I think we can find the answer right here on our panel of witnesses. The Heritage Foundation, Texas Public Policy Foundation, and Independent Women's Forum all get their funding from the fossil fuel industry.
If we signed up for the UAW's request, instead of making money and distributing $75,000 in profit sharing in the last 10 years, we would have lost $15 billion and gone bankrupt by now. There's no way we can be sustainable as a company. That's why we put our proposal in 2 weeks ago to say, look, you want us to choose bankruptcy over supporting our workers?
You've seen a 34% pay increase in your salary. You make almost $30 million. Why should your workers not get the same type of pay increases that you're getting leading the company?
Well, if you look at compensation, my compensation, 92% of it is based on performance of the company.
But if you're getting a 34% pay increase over 4 years and you're offering 20% to employees right now, do you think that's fair?
Well, I think when you look at the overall structure and the fact that 92% is based on performance, and you look at what we've been doing of sharing in the profitability when the company does well, I think we've got a very compelling offer on the table, and that's the focus I have right now.
In 2022, Ford's CEO raked in $21 million, Chrysler's made $24 million, and GM's made $29 million. Right now, the maximum pay for Big Three UAW workers is $66,000. You can't even see the line because that's how little they're paid in comparison to their corporate bosses. It would take a UAW employee a maximum salary almost 440 years to make what the CEO of General Motors makes in 1 year. Yet these CEOs lie that their workers, quote, threaten our economy. I'd like to address the way my Republican colleagues are attempting to co-opt the phrase two-tiered justice system to make it sound like Trump and his cronies are somehow the victims here, when the reality is that the term two-tiered system of justice is meant to refer to the very real system that exists in the United States and which affects Black and brown folks, not powerful former presidents and their political allies. Even now, Republicans still tout that they are the party of law and order, while in the same breath claiming that Donald Trump should not be prosecuted. Don't get it twisted. Republican efforts to use the term two-tier justice is to distract from those who are truly the victims of a disparate treatment in our criminal justice system. And whether we say it out loud or not, we all know who those people are. Right now, Republicans are trying to fool you into thinking that they genuinely care about spending. They hurt everyone in their giveaways to the price gougers that fund their campaigns, and they turn around and blame Black folks and brown folks and poor folks and immigrants for the mess they created. They're lying to you, but you deserve the truth. The truth is that this isn't about balancing the budget. This is about attacking working class, middle class, poor, and marginalized Americans to serve themselves and their filthy rich friends. Republicans know the American people don't want their shutdown. So instead, the Republicans on this committee are attempting to divert and distract the American people's attention by spending taxpayer dollars on this sham impeachment hearing 2 days before they shut the government down in hopes that the media, and I don't just mean Fox News, will fall for their scheme and give more airtime to the lies being told on this committee today than the real life impact their shutdown will have on even their own constituents' lives. In fact, in Chairman Comer's district, Republicans' shutdown will cost 8,937 of his constituents their paychecks. In Jim Jordan's district, Republicans' shutdown will cost 3,939 of his constituents their paychecks. In Marjorie Taylor Greene's district, Republicans' shutdown will cost 6,306 of her constituents their paychecks. In Lauren Boebert's district, Republicans shut down.
Democrats are the party of shutdowns. You guys love shutdowns.
Thank you very much. In Lauren Boebert's district, Republicans shutdown will cost 9,016 of her constituents their paychecks. In Paul Gosar's Arizona district, Republicans shutdown will cost 12,349 of his constituents their paycheck. In Byron Donalds, 3,235 folks paycheck. In Andy Biggs, 8,433. In Lisa McLean, 7,286 in Scott Perry's Pennsylvania district and the capital of my Commonwealth. Republicans shutdown will cost 5,445 of his constituents who will lose their paycheck. Indeed, Mr. Tenaglia, how much on average does the military spend on Viagra each year?
I don't have that figure, ma'am.
About $41.6 million. Do you know how many bridges in my district of Pittsburgh could be repaired with that amount? About 2. The rebuilding of the Fern Hollow Bridge, which of course collapsed the day that President Biden happened to be coming to Pittsburgh, cost about $25.3 million to rebuild. Mr. Tenaglia, how much did the Department of Defense spend on snow crab and Alaska king crab in 2018?
I do not have that amount.
According to Open the Books, it was $2.3 million. Do you know how much the Pittsburgh City Council spends each year serving the county's unhoused population? Only $1.2 million, but they're certainly not being served Alaska king crabs. Republicans want to control what books you read. They want to control what history you learn. They want to control how you identify, who you can love. They want to control our bodies. They want to control everything except that which could prevent mass preventable deaths of children and students and worshipers and shoppers. And the only country on earth that this is a problem. My Republican colleagues seem to subscribe to this belief that D.C. residents are incapable of self-government, and that D.C. residents need members of Congress from faraway places to regulate their conduct. It's beyond offensive, and it's un-American. Republicans know that when people are able to vote freely and without odd constraints, like too long lines in places that they cannot access, or rules that suppress their ability to access the ballot and to vote, when they can vote, they don't win elections. So they make it as difficult as possible and outright deny the right to many Americans. Republican colleagues pretend that DACA recipients are not already here, paying taxes, picking up kids from school, and accessing our public health system. This fix not only helps people who have legal status in our country, but all Americans. We are one of the only Western nations that doesn't have universal health care. I don't think our system is as appealing as Republicans are making it out to be. But cutting health care is par for the course for the so-called pro-life party. This is just another attempt to gut and block access to programs that help keep vulnerable moms and babies alive as our maternal mortality crisis and rates keep rising. To oppose such a small but important change shows a blatant disregard for human life, because no one should be without health care. I yield back. And the reality is that just about every American agrees, no matter where we come from, how we vote, or what our skin color is, we all deserve those things. Yet the Republican Party, bought out by greedy CEOs and billionaires and lobbyists, have always been terrified of that reality. So terrified that instead of facing it, they've chosen to lie and scapegoat and defraud even the folks who elected them, assuming we're all too foolish to see what's really going on.
Quite simply, men do not belong in women's sports. Let me say it one more time. Men do not belong in women's sports. By allowing biological males to compete in women's sports, we are placing our daughters in danger every time they step onto the field. This hearing is about protecting women. Period.
According to the Human Rights Campaign, in just the first 143 days of 2023, elected officials across the nation introduced more than 520 anti-LGBTQIA bills in state legislatures. 23 states banned trans youth from participating in school sports consistent with their gender identity, with some laws focusing on kids as young as kindergarten. How competitive is kindergarten? You all are working so hard at excluding and demonizing a bunch of kids. While this committee purports to care about the safety of women, in 2021, when the House voted to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act, 80% of the Republican caucus voted against that law. Not a single Republican member of this committee, nor our current speaker, voted for it. That bill included a provision to close the boyfriend loophole. Currently, people convicted of domestic violence against a spouse cannot purchase a firearm, but nothing prevents a boyfriend from acquiring one. Ms. Goss-Graves, unlike gun violence, where the data is clear, is there any evidence that allowing transgender athletes to participate in sports presents a safety concern for women?
Absolutely not.
Republicans are demonstrating that they're fundamentally unserious when it comes to addressing the problems that their constituents face, and all of our constituents. Now Republicans are fighting battles so they can reconcile their internal struggle between satisfying their right-wing cable news culture warriors and their ultra-wealthy corporate donors. They're an embarrassment, and their constituents and our country will remember.
Republicans have been invoking this term two-tiered system of justice a lot recently. So I want to talk about what the real two-tiered justice system is, where black and brown people are over-criminalized and over-incarcerated. On June 20th, Chairman Comer claimed in a committee press release, quote, "The Department of Justice's charges against President Biden's son, Hunter, reveal a two-tiered system of justice." From this, as you see or have seen from the knockoff social media site, former President Trump has also used this phrase in connection with the Hunter Biden investigation. The real two-tiered system of justice is one in which, in 2021, according to the DOJ's Bureau of Justice Statistics, the imprisonment rate for black men aged 18 and 19 was 11.6 times the rate for white males. The real two-tiered justice system is one in which, in 2021, according to those same statistics, the imprisonment rate for Native American males aged 18 and 19 was 5.1 times the rate for white males. The two-tier justice system is one in which, according to a May 2018 Vera evidence brief, and I quote, "Black men comprise about 13% of the male population, but about 35% of those incarcerated. 1 in 3 black men born today can expect to be incarcerated in his lifetime, compared to 1 in 6 Latino men and 1 in 17 white men. The two-tiered justice system is one in which an analysis of nearly 100 million traffic stops across this country found that black drivers were about 20% more likely to be stopped than white drivers. My Republican colleagues seem to think that using criminal law as a weapon or a political tool is objectionable only when directed against someone who should be out of reach of the criminal system, someone too rich, too powerful, or too white to be charged. But let's face it, that same system has been used as a weapon and a political tool against black people since the Emancipation Proclamation. These racial disparities are rooted in a two-tiered view on race. The belief that black people were inferior, that was created to justify the enslavement of black people, which has now evolved to include the belief that black people are more prone to criminality. During the decades of lynchings that followed enslavement, white people defended the torture and murder of black people as necessary to protect property, families, and a way of life from black criminals. In the 1980s, Nixon's war on crime evolved into Reagan's war on drugs, and we saw harsher and more frequent punishments and the start of mass incarceration. In both cases, it was black people who were targeted and suffered under those policies. There's a reason that crack cocaine, which carries a stereotype of being used by black people, was at one point punished far more harshly than powder cocaine. Prior to 2010, that ratio was 100-1, meaning someone convicted in a federal court of possessing crack cocaine will receive the same sentence as someone who possessed 100 times more powder cocaine. And I want to say that PA's extreme sentencing practices have overwhelmingly impacted people of color, but most specifically black people, who make up less than 11% of the population in Pennsylvania, but more than 65% of those serving life without parole sentences, and 58% of those serving non-life sentences of 20 years or longer. How many times have our elected officials and judges ran on a promise of a tough on crime approach?
I rise today on behalf of the students, teachers, parents, and loved ones across Western PA who are still reeling from what we all thought was our worst fear come to life today. Just days after families in Nashville went through an unimaginable hell of losing their 9-year-old children because they had the audacity to attend a school in America, we received word about an active shooter situation back home in Pittsburgh. First at Central Catholic High School, then Oakland Catholic High School, and eventually a dozen of our schools across Pennsylvania. Imagine, you're a kid in Central Catholic. You've gone through the active shooter drills, and you saw the news on Monday and heard about every school shooting prior, and today you get a text that a gunman has entered your school. You're wondering if you'll be shot. Will it be your friends who are shot, your classmate, your teammate, your teacher? Can you protect them, or should you run? Do you have time to text your parents one last time? Imagine you're a teacher hysterically crying to the dispatcher a minute after you heard the news. You realize the lock on your door is broken, so you start building barricades with desks and chairs. You ask your students to protect themselves with by whatever means possible, from the metal rod in the closet to the acid chemicals in the physics lab. Imagine you're a parent and you receive that phone call or text. Your heart stops, your world freezes, and your mind starts to race. Can you get to the school on time? Will you ever hug your baby again? Will they meet you at the reunification spot? Active shooters, hoaxes, evacuations, active shooter drills. This is no way for our kids to live. This is disgraceful. And no, to my colleagues across the aisle, this is not normal. Active shooters aren't normal. Shooting hoaxes aren't normal. The evacuations and the active shooting drills aren't normal. There's nothing about this that is normal. Guns are the leading cause of death for children between the ages of 1 and 18. Not car crashes, not illnesses or accidents, it's guns. Tomorrow, we will send our students back to those buildings where they experienced that immense trauma and fear. We'll expect them to pretend it's a normal day. We'll expect them to continue to learn and perform and to be attentive in the same classrooms that they were just barricaded in. Thankfully, unlike the students and the teachers and the families in Nashville or Michigan or Uvalde or Parkland or Sandy Hook or too many others who were gunned down to count, they won't have to cry over their classmates' bodies or see their empty chairs when they return to school. Because this time, it was just a hoax. Not a hoax. It was a swatting of children in schools in this era of heightened fear and vigilance around an epidemic of school and other mass shootings. So thankfully today, it wasn't dead children back home in Pittsburgh. It was just traumatized children. It doesn't have to be this way. And it wouldn't be this way. But it is this way because Republicans care more about guns than our kids or worshipers in a church or a synagogue or shoppers in a Walmart. They will not control the proliferation of guns in this country. And for those of you who say it's too political to ask that we put an end to bullet-ridden babies in body bags and traumatized kids doing active shooter drills in their elementary schools, I ask you to stop putting your politics over our children's lives. I yield back. I rise today on behalf of the mothers, fathers, children, sons, daughters, beloved friends, and community members whose livelihoods, dignity, and in some cases, survival is under attack by Republicans in Congress who are threatening to crash our economy if we don't bend to their pro-hunger, anti-family, anti-senior, anti-worker class agenda to pay for handouts for their billionaire donors. Like so many of the folks I proudly represent, I was raised by a single mother in a working class home. When times were tough, we depended on food assistance from SNAP and health care from Medicaid. I became the first in my family to go to college because I received a Pell Grant, and I'm still in hundreds of thousands of dollars in student debt because I had the audacity to attend law school. I'm able to be in Congress uplifting the voices of poor and working class folks in my community and across the country because of the lifelines Republicans are hell-bent on tearing away. They claim that if we don't strip away food from the struggling, subsistence from seniors, and earned benefits from the elderly to give billionaires the benefits of a tax break, you and your family will pay the price. They're lying to you, but you deserve the truth. The truth is that this isn't about balancing the budget. This is about attacking working class, middle class, poor, and marginalized Americans to serve themselves and their filthy rich friends. The truth is that if Republicans get their way, in Pennsylvania alone, almost 100,000 women, children, and seniors would lose access to food assistance. Over 15,000 children and parents would lose access to preschool and child care. Housing costs would increase for over 20,000 people already struggling to keep a roof over their heads, and college would get more expensive or out of reach entirely for nearly 200,000 PA students. 310 rail safety inspection days would be cut. Just months after Western Pennsylvania, right next to Ohio, suffered from the train derailment in East Palestine. And half a million Pennsylvanians would be at risk of losing life-saving health care coverage under Medicaid. The truth is that if Republicans don't get their way, they're threatening to default on our nation's bills, crash our economy, and unleash economic catastrophe that would kill at least 7 million jobs, 7,000 in my congressional district alone. They're threatening Medicare, Social Security, and veterans' health coverage for nearly 300,000 people in the 2 counties I represent, threatening to increase lifetime mortgage costs by $37,000, and threatening the retirement savings of 100,000 soon-to-be seniors, eliminating 20,000 from typical retirement portfolio. But this isn't about statistics. This is about people's lives. This is about the single mother who, like mine when I was growing up, is paid wages so low at her multiple jobs that she needs food assistance to make sure her kids don't get on the school bus hungry. This is about the nurse who is in medical debt to the hospital she works for, where the CEO is paid millions of dollars, but she is paid so little, she depends on Medicaid for health care for her and her children. This is about the student who has no choice but to take on so much student debt that they know it'll be impossible to ever pay it off, and might not be able to start a business or buy a home or start a family or build the life they deserve. And it's about the student whose great-grandparents were enslaved, whose today's Republicans are hell-bent on keeping shackled by hundreds of thousands of dollars of student loans to the point where their dreams are becoming the first in their family to go to college will be torn away entirely. This is about the child getting ready to start preschool, whose parents will now have to choose between putting gas in their tank and getting their car repaired and giving their child the head start we know could determine their future ability to thrive. It's about the moms and dads who want to work but know they won't be able to because this Republican majority wants to raise child care costs that are already so high that it makes more sense to just stay home. It's about your parents who could lose their ability to retire in dignity, and the veteran who could lose access to treatment for PTSD after spending their life serving this country. And it's about our grandparents who won't be able to afford the medication they need to stay alive, to meet their grandchildren if Republicans cause a default. And let's not forget, this is also about the billionaire CEO who is bankrolling the Republican politicians behind this attack on working families to win themselves yet another handout that will be paid for by tearing food and shelter away from all the folks I just described, millions of families just to buy another shiny new yacht or another vacation home or another fat check to those same politicians as a thank you for the favor. By forcing a choice between agreeing to their authoritarian tactics or default, Republicans are erasing the voices of millions of people in this country who oppose default, who oppose economic catastrophe, who oppose tearing away food stamps and health care and Social Security and Medicaid and Medicare. Republicans are using the threat of default to override the will of the majority of the country and bury poor and working class Americans. And we cannot and we will not let them.
that the other side of the aisle that called the hearing didn't even bother to show up. But we're here, so I guess we'll carry on with the hearing so as to not waste your time as much as our time is being wasted here. But we're currently facing a climate crisis, right? That's not an opinion, it is a fact. And we can't just sit around and do nothing, though. Sometimes we do worse than nothing. Propping up the fossil fuel industry with these fabricated anti-ESG policies or whatever acronym we're going to use is actually worse than doing nothing. It's harmful to Americans' health, their quality of life, and retirement funds. Our future is at stake, and instead of holding a hearing on that actual real crisis, we're wasting our time again on this nonsense. We heard in the last hearing how vital it is to look at the big picture for investments and that long-term growth is the ultimate goal. The anti-ESG policies do nothing more than force blinders on investors and prevent them from considering legitimate risk factors. This past February, a Norfolk Southern train derailed just outside of my district in neighboring Ohio, causing hazardous chemicals to be released into the air and the soil and water in East Palestine. The EPA has since issued an order directing Norfolk Southern to pay EPA's response costs and has filed a complaint along with the U.S. Attorney's Office against the company seeking penalties and injunctive relief. Dr. Rajgopal, will any potential imposed penalties by the EPA affect the bottom line of Norfolk Southern?
No. Most penalties tend to be fairly small compared to the social loss imposed by the company, unfortunately. So I'd say it's probably a blip on the stock price, if anything, maybe not even a blip.
Why is it so important for asset managers to be able to consider factors, however, like climate change and to make investments in clean energy technologies when making decisions?
So let's go back to the BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street idea. These are so-called universal owners, meaning they hold the stock for 20, 30 years until the stock gets probably displaced from the index. So if the firm misses a quarter, they're not going to sell the stock. So they have to worry about, factors that might affect the future cash flows in the stock 10, 15, 20 years out. That's why you need to have a conversation about like climate risk.
Current fossil fuel assets are facing an estimated $1 trillion loss over the next 15 years. Their need for a paycheck is apparently more important than ensuring our planet is usable for the next generation. I came to environmental justice not through education, but through necessity. Pittsburgh has some of the worst air quality in the nation on any given day. Allegheny County, specifically the Mon Valley where I grew up, suffers from some of the highest rates of asthma, of cancer, and of other respiratory illnesses. We see corporate polluters sacrifice the health and well-being of our communities for their own financial gain over and over. Yet when we want to consider the environmental impact and how we invest our money, they lobby and they throw money around to stop us. Every person deserves clean air and a livable future. My Republican colleagues need to wake up and get with the majority of Americans who are demanding action on climate change. I yield back. I can only think of one reason why we are here yet again to give and conduct all of this oversight on this one mid-sized city that doesn't have a state or any representation. We're not seeing this oversight over conservative areas. We're not seeing this oversight over majority white areas or white states. So it must be that DC has over 45% of black folks with a very suppressible vote, because that's the real goal here, to disenfranchise black and brown voters. Ms. Weiser, are the people residing in the U.S. territories, such as Puerto Rico or Guam or the U.S. Virgin Islands, able to vote for the president?
I believe they are.
Those same people are United States citizens, correct?
That is correct.
Millions of residents of the 5 U.S. territories, 98% of whom are people of color, are denied full voting rights, despite paying nearly $4 billion in federal taxes and having a population equivalent to that of the 5 smallest U.S. states combined. We're perpetuating a system of colonialism and paternalism. These folks do not have full voting rights in Congress or the Senate. Earlier this year, Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell took to the floor of the Senate and said that, quote, "It's about time the federal government provides some adult supervision for DC." Let me just say, The folks who are duly elected to represent the city of DC are not children. The voters, the folks of voting age, they're not children. The last two hearings on DC were entitled overdue oversight of the capital city. They're not even trying to play down the dog whistles anymore. I was going to ask some semi-rhetorical questions to Ms. Evans to highlight the absurdity of this third DC hearing on disenfranchisement. I'll answer them myself, though. I was going to ask about the 535 voting members of Congress, how many of those members did DC get to vote for? The answer is 0. I was then going to ask, of those 535 voting members of Congress, do any of them know more about or care more about DC and its nearly 700,000 residents than DC's locally elected officials? This is, of course, conjecture, but I think you would probably say that these 535 of my colleagues do not know or care more about the day in and day out needs or desires of the people of DC. It's beyond offensive and it's un-American. I want to thank the joint subcommittees for holding this hearing on the financial mismanagement of the Department of Defense. I think this is one of the few areas where I can agree with my Republican colleagues on the need and nature of this oversight. When we dedicate so many of our resources to our military, while we nickel and dime our other programs, the least we are owed is transparency and accountability. When our country spends more on defense than the next 10 countries combined, we rightfully have high expectations for how that department functions. Yet, year after year, we shovel billions their way, 15% of our total budget. We continue to be disappointed, and the American people are let down. Mr. Tenaglia, how much did the 2023 National Defense Authorization Act authorize for shipbuilding?
I do not have that particular figure.
Yep.
The total amount of contract obligations in 2022 was over $400 billion.
For shipbuilding, it authorized $32.6 billion. Do you know how many school lunches that amount could provide to hungry children in America, where for the 1 in 8 children who go to school hungry, that may be the only meal they get? All of them, and then some. The school lunch program cost $28.7 billion in 2022. According to an investigation by this committee in 2016, the F-35 program specifically raked up hundreds of millions of dollars in added costs due to mismanagement and negatively affected military readiness. Mr. Tenaglia, how much is the F-35 joint program estimated to cost the federal government to produce, operate, and sustain over its lifetime?
I believe the GAO cited that figure. I don't have it in front of me, but we can get that for you.
It's about $1.7 trillion, enough to completely eradicate student loan debt. According to the Government Accountability Office, between May 2018 and October 2022, about 1 million F-35 spare parts worth $85 million were, quote, lost, just vanished. Losing millions of dollars in assets is unacceptable. DoD themselves do not oversee or account for certain F-35 spare parts. Only the prime contractors maintains this information. Mr. Khan, how does this lack of access to contractor information hinder accountability and DoD's ability to provide accurate reporting in its audit?
It severely impacts DoD's ability to be able to provide accountability over those assets.
Mr. Tenaglia, going forward, what steps can your office take to improve contract requirements on the front end to enable better oversight during the life of the contract?
So we're taking those actions now, improving the clauses, the terms and conditions that go into contracts that communicate to contractors what the requirements are for property management, and the government furnished property module that I described. It's the means by which contractors can communicate how they are dispositioning property, how they're receiving property, and where we know where that property is throughout its life.
Okay, thank you. In 2019, this committee led a bipartisan hearing to hold military contractors, Transgender, accountable for its exorbitant profits on DoD contracts for spare parts. This pressure led to Transgender paying DoD $16.1 million. Last Congress, this committee held a second hearing, again on the excess profits that Transgender received. I'll note that my Republican colleagues did not join our call for Transgender to repay its excess profits, even though Transgender has a track record of fleecing American taxpayers.
TransDigm's likes to acquire companies with sole source DoD contracts and then exploit its monopoly position by hiking up prices on crucial spare parts. Mr. Tenaglia, what policy changes is DoD considering to prevent price gouging on sole source contracts, and are there specific legislative reforms that would assist this effort?
So as I indicated in my written statement, Section 803 of the FY23 NDAA helps us in that regard. It will require contractors to provide the transparent cost and pricing data that we need. In the case of commercial items, likely that will be uncertified information, but by the same token, our contracting officers need access to that information in order to establish fair and reasonable price.
Thank you. It's my time, but I want to say I urge the department to do better. Your department accounts for 15% of the total budget. You need to be more mindful in not only how you spend America's tax dollars, but also how you account for it. Millions of dollars should not just be lost, and failing audits should not be the norm. That is unacceptable. I yield back.
Folks, this hearing, like so many before it, is nothing more than par for course fear-mongering by my Republican colleagues. To be very clear, we're not talking about millions of people at the border, a racist myth disproven annually at this point. We're talking about closing a gap in healthcare coverage for about 129,000 people with a legal status in this country. Healthcare is a human right, and it should be available to everyone who resides in this country, no matter who they are. As those of us who care for our fellow man continue to push toward a Medicare for all system, a stop on the fight is fixing a technical wrong, which was not extending the Affordable Care Act to DACA recipients back in 2012. This should be an easy fix. Healthcare coverage ensures that people are accessing services before they are critically sick. It encourages the use of preventative resources like cancer screenings and routine vaccinations, something that people who grew up with insurance often take for granted. Dr. Mons, what are the collective public health benefits of expanding healthcare coverage to more people?
Thank you for that question. What studies have indicated, and certainly experience shows, is that when an individual is uninsured, when an individual is insured, rather, that individual is better able to keep themselves healthy. For example, go to the doctor to receive preventive services. Keeping an individual, keeping yourselves healthy also means that you can be more productive at your job in the workforce for the economy. Studies have shown that individuals who are insured have 70% lower rates of absenteeism in the workforce. Additionally, from a global economy perspective for the United States, being insured means that you are not incurring uncompensated care costs to the healthcare system, which I've said before are ultimately incurred by local, state, and federal government.
Many DACA recipients receive health insurance through work and rely on their benefits, just like nearly everyone on this dais today. Others live in states like California or New York, states that have successfully allowed DACA recipients to enroll in Medicaid and other state-funded plans for years. What we are talking about today is a proposed rule to extend Affordable Care Act benefits to an estimated 129,000 uninsured DACA recipients. And make no mistake, these individuals are still getting sick and going to taxpayer-funded clinics and emergency rooms. But just like everyone else in this country, they deserve more than just emergency care. They deserve affordable prescription drugs and access to comprehensive health care and preventative treatments. Dr. Mons, knowing that many DACA recipients already rely on our health care system, why would it be beneficial to expand their access to affordable insurance?
Thank you for that question. As I said, there are multiple benefits to being insured versus uninsured, including healthier, more productive life, your limited risk of receiving high medical bills that you're not able to pay for that then are incurred by the health insurance system.
Let me ask, when we're talking about the expansion of Medicaid, who would it apply to and about how many people would that include?
Our proposed rule estimates that in the roughly 35 states that have elected this option under CHIPRA 214 to cover pregnant individuals and children who are lawfully residing, that would extend coverage to about 13,000 individuals.
13,000 individuals. Would those states be required to expand health care coverage for Medicaid?
The CHIPRA 214 coverage option is an option for states. They are allowed to cover or not cover lawfully residing.
Thank you. Just to conclude, the Affordable Care Act takes important steps to ensure that people are not denied basic health care because of their gender, disability status, zip code, or income. But we still need Medicare for all, and we will keep fighting for it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 3 hours and 45 or so minutes into this, the Republicans' own witnesses have confirmed that they have seen no evidence of any evidence. I think that if my Republican colleagues had a so-called smoking gun, they would have presented it by now and would have talked about it non-stop.
Can the gentlelady read a bank statement, an email, a text message?
Are you asking her to yield,
reclaiming
Mr.
my
Chairman?
time. Thank you.
All right.
Reclaiming my time. Instead, we're sitting here with no fact witnesses and no evidence in this sham so-called impeachment to distract from their inability to fulfill their basic duty to fund and run our government. When you add it all up, Republicans' shutdown will cost 217,583 of their constituents on this committee's paychecks, their income for who knows how long. Let that sink in for a second. Those are our mothers, our fathers, caretakers, brothers, sisters, moms, dad, grandmas, grandpas, friends, neighbors, beloved community members, veterans who won't know how their food or medicine will be paid for or where their rent money is coming from. Many of them vote Republican, but I'd bet you not one of them cares more about Hunter Biden's laptop or helping Kevin McCarthy keep his gig as leader or speaker of his dysfunctional caucus than they care about receiving their paycheck and making their ends meet. And so the Republicans on this committee are betting that we'll spend this hearing engaging in partisan bickering over their favorite buzzwords rather than talking about how the MAGA shutdown will crush all of our constituents. To be honest, I don't quite care about private citizen Hunter, whom the proper authorities are dealing with, or the cable news culture war distractions. I care about the 7 million babies, children, mothers across this country who after Sunday will lose access to food and formula, over 10,000 in my district alone. I care about 300,000 families of 20,000 veterans who after Sunday could face eviction from their homes. Rare diseases and cancer patients whose experimental trials will be delayed for months. And I care about our seniors unable to get help with Social Security and Medicare. And make no mistake, their attacks are targeted, both in who's behind them and who are going to be hurt most. The most marginalized folks bear the brunt of these MAGA Republicans' attacks. Black folks, brown folks, trans folks, poor folks, disabled folks. Keeping that struggle in mind, we've had 2 hearings on the infant formula shortage on the subcommittee chaired by Congresswoman McClain. Yet with the 320,000 babies, women, and children in her home state of Michigan about to go hungry due to her party's shutdown, it seems like my Republican colleagues only care about an issue when they can point the finger in another direction, much like what's going on in this embarrassment of a hearing today. Mr. Gerhardt, in one of your recent op-eds, and you have repeated it here, you mentioned that a good test for assessing the constitutionality of a governmental action is to switch the names of the political parties and the actors involved. If the outcome is the same, it is a good sign of neutrality. If the outcome is not the same, then there's a good chance that partisanship is the driving force. I think we can safely say that this inquiry would fail that neutrality test. And since I don't have time, I think we can say that we are here, America, in this sham hearing, prioritizing the political needs of the Republican Party, pushing a lie for Donald Trump as you go hungry and you lose your homes. Shameful. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today on behalf of the grandmas and grandpas and moms and dads and neighbors and beloved community members who spent their entire lives paying into Medicare out of their own paychecks on the sacred promise that they could retire with health and dignity, only to have that promise betrayed by today's Republican Party. I stand here on behalf of our aging parents and sons and daughters fighting mental illness, loved ones who are cancer patients and stroke survivors, workers injured on the job, orphaned children, and siblings with disabilities whose access to food, shelter, medicine, and dignified retirement depends on Social Security that Republicans are hell-bent on tearing away. In Pennsylvania alone, 2.8 million folks depend on Medicare, 227,727 in Allegheny County. 2.9 million depend on Social Security, nearly 150,000 in my district alone. Every one of them deserves to retire in dignity with access to health care. Every one of them deserves a Congress where every member has the decency to honor that sacred promise not to leave our families behind at the hardest moments of their lives. So let me break it down. First, Republicans passed tax handouts for their filthy rich donors, promising a trickle-down miracle that never has and will never happen, from Reaganomics to the Trump tax scam. Then, when their tax scam causes the economy to slow and deficits to grow, they refuse to correct their mistake. Instead, they blame immigrants, poor folks, black folks, and brown folks. Next, Republicans pretend to panic and call for devastating cuts to Social Security and Medicare that would force Americans to work longer for less and tear away their hard-earned retirement and end Medicare as we know it, reducing spending. Then they call for more handouts for their billionaire donors and corporate polluters, hoping that you'll settle for tearing away your neighbors' lifelines to protect your own right to retire in dignity, forcing us to the brink of catastrophic shutdown or debt ceiling crises until we clean up their mess. Then they repeat the cycle, hoping enough of us will forgive and forget their scheme to tear away Medicare and Social Security and believe their lie that they were only after food assistance or health care or housing for poor folks, not your earned benefits, when the truth is that they always were and always will be after it all. As I speak, Republicans on the Budget Committee are holding a hearing to establish a death panel. Thank you. I'm wrapping this up. As I speak, the Republicans on the Budget Committee are holding a hearing to establish a death panel commission to gut earned benefits, where their chairman called this party's fight to tear Social Security our generation's world war. At a time when the majority of Pennsylvania say they struggle to afford health care and half are delaying getting the Medicare they need because they can't afford it, we as Democrats have an obligation to fight not only Social Security, to protect Social Security and Medicare, but to expand them. Preserve the retirement age, increase benefits to keep up with inflation, expand Medicare to include vision, dental, hearing, hold big pharma price gougers accountable, and pass Medicare for all. I urge my colleagues to defeat the previous question so we can bring up legislation that reaffirms the House of Representatives' commitment to protecting and strengthening Social Security and Medicare, and I yield back.
It's disappointing to me that although the title of this hearing implies a much-needed discussion, we're likely going to be forced to listen to transphobic bigotry. Because actually, protecting female athletes in Title IX is important. Participating in sports provides so many benefits to our young people. Those benefits range from improved mental and physical health to enriched life skills, such as teamwork and goal setting. In terms of mental health, studies show that participating in youth sports is associated with lower rates of anxiety and depression, lower amounts of stress, higher self-esteem and confidence, and reduced risk of suicide. So why are my Republican colleagues working so hard to prevent our trans youth from participating? I think it's important that we raise the voices of transgender athletes, their families, and teammates. I'd like to read a few of their stories written in the first person. The first from Cece Telfer, a professional track athlete, model, and advocate. I was a former D2 national champion in the 400-meter hurdles, and I am now a professional athlete training to make it on the Team USA and represent them in the following Olympics to come. Sports have given me a plethora of things, but mainly sports have given me strength, taught me how to overcome fear and stand up when defeated. Sports have given me collaborative skills that was developed throughout the years of being an athlete and having teammates. Sports taught me how to stay focused and committed, along with the necessary skills that sports has taught me and giving me clarity and freedom. Transgender women and girls, transgender people are not a threat. We don't play sports to cheat. We deserve the rights as any other women because that's what we are. There are rules and regulation that define our ability to compete.
The narrative that builds on myself and trans kids in the community is negative and dehumanizing. It feels as though people don't want us to exist. And in order to change the narrative, because we do exist, and we're not going to stop existing, we need to stop these anti-trans bills. They are dehumanizing and kids are dying. Instead, I believe the government should step up and support trans people on all levels to show that we are seen and have rights and are people just like everybody else. From Ember, a transgender female high school softball player. When I was younger, I played co-ed baseball. I loved it. When the teams became single sex, I no longer fit in. I was teased and ostracized, though the most difficult part was not feeling like myself, so I quit. I came out as trans in 7th grade and wanted to play softball, but my state requires trans girls to take hormones for a year before they can play a sport. So I waited for 3 years. During that time, I became self-conscious, uncomfortable with my body, and lost all of my confidence. I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety. I was finally approved to play on a girls' team in the spring of my sophomore year of high school. Playing on a girls' team has been an incredible experience for me. I have made so many friends and improved so much despite starting so late. My teammates treat me just like everyone else on the team. So do my coaches. My team is part of my family. We are all so different and come from different cliques, but when we're together on the field, we are there for each other no matter what. Every kid should be lucky enough to have this experience. And from Debbie Jackson, a parent of a non-binary teen. My child, Avery, is now 15 years old. Avery doesn't even remember what it was like to be viewed as a boy. We affirmed who they are at a young age and supported a social transition before kindergarten. During that time, Avery was in a co-ed trampoline class at a local gym. The gymnastics classes at the gym were divided by gender, and as we began referring to Avery as our daughter, Avery asked to move into gymnastics. It was one additional step towards being affirmed and accepted authentically. To this day, some of my favorite photos and videos are from the first day of that class when Avery marched so confidently onto the mats with a barely grown out traditional boyish haircut next to a gaggle of other girls with their bouncy ponytails. Avery enthusiastically followed every word of the coach, trying forward rolls and falling off the balance beam with every step, literally every step. Avery was the most gloriously awkward, non-athletic creature I have ever witnessed. I can safely tell you that Avery is still a gloriously awkward, non-athletic creature who will never win in any athletic endeavor. But participating in sports isn't about winning. Playing sports helps with mental health, teaches teamwork, provides camaraderie with others, and teaches discipline and goal setting. It opens doors to friendship, connection, and community with others. That's what my child experienced in that gymnastics class, and other trans kids deserve to experience all of those benefits too. I am so thankful that Avery didn't have to choose between not participating in sports or being forced to participate as a boy. Forcing a transgender child to choose between living an authentic life and playing a game is cruel. Think about how it would feel to have your body openly discussed by others or have the fairness of your existence and basic rights debated in a public forum. That's what you are doing to innocent kids. Please leave our kids alone. They deserve so much better from people in power. I want to thank these people for sharing their stories and reminding us that this is about children and daughters and sons and siblings and friends. These are real people with real experiences who deserve to feel loved and included. I'd ask unanimous consent to enter these letters to the Committee for Transgender Athletes provided by the National Center for Transgender Equality.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Sports are a vital aspect of education that offers important lessons. Athletics allows young people from diverse backgrounds to engage in healthy movement and play, learn how to work as a team, and form meaningful connections. Madam Chair, I ask that while we sit through this hearing and hear the hateful misinformation I'm sure is going to come our way, let us not forget that children are at the core of this issue. I yield back. I must say I'm surprised to hear that my Republican colleagues care so much about protecting the, quote, safety, privacy, and opportunities of women, since their voting record and priorities this Congress shows the opposite. A report released last year in conjunction with the 50th anniversary of Title IX found that men's athletic programs received more than twice as many resources as women's programs in 2020, and that expenditures for recruiting and compensating head coaches and assistant coaches favored male athletes nearly 3 to 1. Yet the 2024 appropriations bill did nothing to expand access for women in sports. It did, however, contain a rider to prevent the proposed Department of Education rule relating to transgender athletes' ability to participate in sports. Ms. Gosgraves, to your knowledge, do any of the bans preventing transgender students from participating in sports increase funding for women's sports?
No, they do not.
Do any of these bans improve playing fields or increase the number of women's teams?
Absolutely not.
Do any of these bans provide resources to expand recreational sports opportunities for low-income female athletes?
No.
Because my Republican colleagues also claim to be concerned about women's privacy and opportunities, let's also discuss the Women's Health Protection Act, which passed in the House last year and would protect and expand access to abortion care. Not a single Republican voted for this law. The right to abortion is rooted directly in the right to privacy. And research has repeatedly shown that the ability to access abortion corresponds with greater economic opportunities for women. Ms. Gosgraves, is there any reason to believe that allowing transgender young people to participate in sports threatens women's privacy or employment or economic opportunities?
None of those things are threatened by the participation of transgender individuals in sports.
Thank you. In fact, isn't there a risk that banning transgender athletes could lead to privacy violations, either through requiring documentation or invasive examinations?
There is a deep worry there, and some states have passed that sort of sex verification law, which would subject all women and girls to those sorts of examinations.
Ms. Gosgraves, what should we actually focus on if we want to protect opportunities for women in sports?
There is an opportunity right now to promote further resources to address sexual abuse that is happening in sports, to provide the sort of resources that mean more kids have an opportunity to play, and to advocate for, that the Biden administration finalize this rule that has been waiting for so long. That's where we are.
We've seen these same misguided arguments before, rooted in false stereotypes, when athletes of color tried to integrate white sports leagues who were accused of taking away opportunities from white athletes. Black women in sports, whether they are cis, trans, or intersex, constantly encounter shifting rules and expectations as a reprimand for their success. They are accused of doping or cheating in order to win. People make cruel remarks about their perceived femininity and create racist depictions of their physicality, all in attempts to discourage and exclude them from competing, and ultimately to keep them from winning. They were wrong then, and they're wrong now. I'm offended to see hatred and bigotry wrapped up in faux concerns about women and girls. We're talking about children wanting to play sports, wanting to feel included and accepted. I'd like to quote the Republican governor from Utah, Governor Cox's veto message, who said, quote, "Rarely has so much fear and anger been directed at so few. I don't understand what they are going through or why they feel the way they do, but I want them to live." I yield back.
Madam Speaker, I stand here today because we are just 1 month from another government shutdown, and congressional Republicans have demonstrated once again that they're more concerned about satisfying their culture warrior base than actually addressing any of the problems their constituents face. But that hasn't stopped us from delivering for our districts. I'm here because the everyday working class people of Allegheny and Westmoreland counties came together to say everybody should have a livable wage, clean air and water, affordable housing, decent transportation and health care. The people I represent resoundingly rejected the status quo and decades of corporations leaving us behind and polluting our communities without accountability. They demanded political representation that will actually try to solve the problems they face and not play political games with their lives. Our movement's detractors would, including those in Congress, many of them, will try to make you believe that people from working class backgrounds representing working class districts are too consumed by fighting national political battles and don't do enough to deliver for our districts. But let's be clear. Key priorities of the Biden administration, like the Inflation Reduction Act, would not have happened without progressives here fighting tooth and nail to ensure that our communities had what they needed to thrive. And despite Republicans' dysfunction, we haven't stopped fighting even for 1 second. And we are proud to have delivered in my district nearly $1 billion in federal investments for infrastructure, affordable housing, STEM innovation, clean air, and good paying jobs, because the people of Western Pennsylvania and across the country deserve leaders in Congress who've lived their struggles and work as hard as they do. Whether it was delivering $400 million from the Department of Energy Clean Financing Program to fund EOS, a battery storage manufacturer that will employ thousands of workers in PA12's Mon Valley in particular, or the over $150 million to improve transit in Pittsburgh, or helping to deliver $50 million for affordable housing in the historically divested Hill District of Pittsburgh. Our movement in Pennsylvania is delivering on priorities that won't just improve our communities, but the lives of people across the country. We're demonstrating the power we can recognize when communities that have been left behind elect leaders that have actually gone through what they have. Throughout history, and particularly over the past 4 decades, working class people, disproportionately Black and brown, have been told our priorities are too radical, our needs are too unrealistic, and that our lives are expendable. Our movement stands in direct contrast to that, standing up to moneyed interest and fighting for our communities to be healthier, stronger, and more resilient. The wins we've secured that I've talked about today represent just a small part of what our movement has done while in elective office, and you can be sure we're not done yet.
I rise today on behalf of the United Auto Workers, powering the Big Three, and all workers on the front lines for the fight for a future with fair pay, dignity, and the right to benefit from the profits of their hard work currently being hoarded by corporate CEOs. Let me be clear, any company that can afford 40% raises for CEOs already raking in millions can afford 40% raises for their workers who our clean energy economy depends on. These workers don't threaten our economy, but CEOs do. So to the Big Three, pay those workers what you owe them. Don't act like you forgot. Solidarity forever. I yield back.